Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of WAGME TV, episode 21. We have a really good episode for you guys today. A lot to cover around a lot of different subjects. As of course, we have the doctor, Doc Mata. We have the All-American, Ev Smith, and myself, Alex. So, really excited to hop in here, guys. Been pretty bullish week, honestly. Like what are kind of our initial thoughts around Bitcoin and Ethereum? Like, obviously, lots going on with both of those, and Ethereum's arguably even looking stronger.
Yeah, it's been a pretty awesome week. I think we've seen great gains in the markets along with crypto, like you're saying, ETH and Bitcoin. ETH has been on a roll. It's up, nearly $500 this past week. And, we've talked about in past episodes just some of the bearish news we have around the merge and some of the different setbacks that have happened in the last couple months here. But it seems like we've got some good news coming out of that front. Along with on the market side, we had some great numbers come out of the bank earnings. Big banks had earnings on Monday. I think it was Bank of America and Goldman Sachs. And the big question around those earnings reports were the revenues and the revenues because of these interest rate hikes and how that's going to affect how banks can lend to other parties. And they saw really strong numbers. So, on the crypto front and the market front, pretty great week so far.
Yeah, definitely been pretty bullish. It's been a nice breather from what felt like just a fall off a cliff there for a little bit. So I think, not to get too much into it, I think we'll dive in here, but pretty much mirroring exactly what Evan said, right? We have seen fairly good earnings reports, everything like that within the market itself. Ethereum's merge has been getting some good news, and that's been kind of the bullish leader for everything. I think, when we go back to some of the macro stuff, there's a lot of thoughts that maybe inflation has peaked. And typically when inflation peaks, that's when the market starts to turn around. So a lot of stuff kind of coming our way. As we know, the equity markets and the crypto market as a whole, because it kind of mirrors it in a way, they really do. They are kind of a little bit more proactive when pricing a lot of these things in. So they're kind of trying to predict what's going to happen. And I think that's part of the stuff that we're seeing right now within these markets, and a little bit of a bullish break for us. So I guess really the question is this something that can stand to keep going? And if not, when does that reversal back downwards happen? But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it kind of leads us into actually taking a look at what Bitcoin's done recently and maybe where we could be headed. And so the vertical lines here are when the FOMC meetings have occurred and when the rate hikes have happened. So, obviously the first time it seems like, we hiked 25 basis points, maybe we're expecting 50, and we saw a little bit of a run up. The second time we hiked, I think I want to say we hiked 75 when they expected 50. And we saw that decline. And then here we more so just saw like a slightly downwards, but then sideways movement. So, whether or not that indicates like, people are confident in the way that they approached it or not, that's kind of up for debate. But right now, like a lot of what's going on. So we talked about this just before, but recently we had what's called a double bottom. So if we see here, these two areas right here, and 9 times out of 10, that's somewhat of a bullish signal. And we did see a bit of a run up. We've seen since that bottom, we've seen 23, 24%, which is, like our motto is saying, a pretty good relief from what we're used to. But at the same time, a lot of what we're seeing in this kind of little channel here playing between the Fed markers, we've also seen some of this action leading up after a Fed meeting as well. So we've definitely seen like, some upwards action before, some crazy downwards movement, similar to here, like where we, consolidate for a little bit, and then we try to get a little bit of upwards movement and then end up coming back down. So it's definitely possible it can happen, but I feel like we may have some time leading up to this next Fed meeting to get some action going. But I don't know if you guys have any insights into what we're seeing.
Yeah.
No, I do. Go ahead, Evan.
Well, I was just going to say, I think on that third line that we see there, there was an article that came out in the one right after that. See it to the right. Yeah. There was an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal a couple days before the actual meeting that said that the Fed was going to rate hike of 75 basis points. So I think that's why you can kind of see that line just being a little bit off. But yeah, I mean, that first section that we have between the first and the second meeting, it was a lot of things were up in the air. People really didn't know what we were going to get out of the Fed that next meeting. And it seems like these past two segments that we've seen, the past two gaps between the meetings, it's been pretty steady. And like Bitcoin has been able to establish a good resistance in the zones that it's in. And it seems like, yeah, we're just going to see how the reports come out in the Fed. It's a macro focused environment right now. You know, TA is awesome until the Fed drops a crazy new hike on us, and then it's out the window. So at least what we're seeing is like there's some good resistance being established at these levels that we have at the moment.
Yeah, and kind of what we were talking about just before we hopped on here. I mean, this TA is fairly bullish, right? But we are looking at a fairly short-term look rather than kind of zooming out to what the entirety of this chart looks like, right? So could be bullish for now, which is great. As we can see there, that blue line is the 200-week moving average for Bitcoin, correct, Garcia?
Yes.
So we did break through that, right? That was a big resistance point, a big psychological point within the market. And so now that we've broken through that, the question is, can we now flip that into support and continue to hold that? You know, positive news, it starts to bring people back into the market. I think I've had a couple people reach out to me and ask me, hey, you know, is Bitcoin going down again, or
right,
you know, is this the turnaround? And when you start getting those texts, you start to realize that retail and some of those, you know, tourists or visitors, right, are starting to come back and look at Bitcoin as well. And so that's when you get kind of some of those FOMO prices to start going and everything like that. I think the big question for us, right, is can it last? Like I was mentioning, right? We have at that fourth white line we have on there, the Fed Reserve meeting, that's the 27th of July, correct?
Yes.
And then that's where we find out about, you know, how much interest rates are being hiked, right? If it's not expected, if it's not as expected, we could see maybe a little bit of a downturn here. If it is expected, we could continue to go a little bit higher there, or, you know, again, it could be cut short because we do have some of the GDP figures for Q2 of 22 coming out the day after, on the 28th of July. So
right,
something to note on that. So the textbook we've been hearing, I feel like everyone's been hearing about recessions a lot. And so the textbook definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. We've already had one. And the thought is on the 28th of July, they're going to announce that it's the second negative quarter with GDP growth. And we're going to actually officially enter that recession, right? And so it's kind of a lagging indicator, right? A lot of people have been saying we're in a recession, and the second that everyone in the Fed say that we are officially in a recession, we're already halfway or on our way out of that recession itself. So on that announcement, right, not only this fourth little line that we're looking at for the FOMC meeting, but the day after will be a lot of potential movement, right? It could be bullish if the Fed decides, okay, we're going to have to pause interest rate hikes because we're in a recession. Could also cause the market to crash even harder if they say, nope, we're going to continue to do this, like they've kind of signaled that they are going to do. So just honestly, a lot of uncertainty still in the market around how Bitcoin's going to handle the first economic recession, what inflation looks like, all this stuff with the Fed. So once again, don't fight the Fed. Whatever happens is kind of mostly depends on how they're going to react to all of this.
Yeah.
So short term feels fairly bullish. I think we've got a lot of good signs. We've got a lot of retail getting a little bit more interested again. We're seeing some positive price action after what felt like falling off a cliff. But yeah, that's kind of my little spiel. I don't know if y'all had anything to add to that.
No, I mean, I think it's good to like you know, set monikers up for like short term versus long term, right? Like I think short term, you know, obviously not financial advice, but like if people are thinking about, okay, well, what's the highest it could go or what's the lowest it could go, like based on what we're seeing on the chart, I would say, 29, 30K, like up in this area is probably the highest we'd go in the short term before facing like serious resistance. Like 9 times out of 10, you're not going to break one of these heavy resistance levels and just keep going. So like, I mean, you see that here, and then finally you get a little something. But that's pretty common. So it's really, really rare that we would just kind of blow through that. But I could see us like with all this uncertainty, people thinking that, might be time to FOMO. I could see us getting a little bit bullish up into, that meeting. And then maybe after that, correcting a little bit, whether it goes back down to like 15, 17K, like that's definitely up in the air, but that would be kind of the next area that I'd look at if we lost, this kind of 18-ish K area in support. But
Right.
that's what I'm looking at.
And there's a big gap after this Fed meeting too. There's 2 months where Bitcoin gets to play around with, really no big, meetings that you need to watch out for. So that's something where if we see bullish news coming out of, both the rate hikes that the Fed's announcing and also the GDP growth, you never know where it could go. And then on the other side, the bear side, if we're fully in a recession, if the Fed thinks that we need another 75 basis points, then it's a whole new, book of rules that we got to play with. And you've seen the drops that Bitcoin has had after 2 consecutive 75 basis point hikes by the Fed. We've seen these last 2 have significant percentage drops coming out of these meetings. And so it's really going to be a question of what is the market projecting at this moment. These prices are built on anticipation. And so is it something where people feel like this is the level that they've a good price that it could stick with for an extended period of time as these like macro factors get worse and worse, like we talk about? Or is it something where the price decreases? So yeah, a lot of big question marks there. Another note here is just around other currencies, like the US dollar and how strong the US dollar is compared to other foreign currencies, along with just the price of assets. Like you're seeing the US dollar increase. And so that could play, price action on Bitcoin where there's less dollars needed to buy Bitcoin. And so maybe that's also a small factor in these price fluctuations, is that the dollar is getting stronger. And so, less of them are needed to buy one Bitcoin. So it's a question of, there's a lot of factors and in this next stage after the Fed meeting, what's going to be the biggest factor determining how this price plays out.
Yeah, and I think a good point that you made there too was like, this is our widest gap that we've ever had between an interest rate hike meeting by like a pretty good amount, like basically by 50% more like of time. And so it's going to be interesting because I feel like this is when people really don't know what to do. And you kind of see that in the price action, right? Like people are just kind of like staying in the same area here. Yes, you get this pump and this drop, but net, like you're basically at the same area you were pre-Fed meeting before the next one. So it's like, I think people are basically using these meetings to say, okay, well, what's my next move? And now we have double the amount of time for people to be guessing and like, you're not really knowing what to do. So it'll be kind of interesting to see what they do.
No, it's a really good point.
Just to share a couple of things while we stick on the macro front. I know we were bringing up Ethereum, so wanted to kind of give us an update on this. I'm not sure if you all have a little bit more to share on this front, but the devs from Ethereum did kind of signal that the merge was on the way. They've pushed in, penciled in, whatever you want to call it, to that September date. Any thoughts on that? I'm thinking, the bullish news around Ethereum and them kind of being a leader this last week as one of the big players of the last bull market has kind of started to bring a lot of these L1s, smart contract platforms, a little bit higher, obviously, as well as Bitcoin. But any thoughts on that or comments on that?
I mean, it's exciting stuff. We've seen in the last couple of meetings that they've been able to integrate in test networks successfully, which is no small feat. And but I don't know if it sounds like there's a fresh timeline for test nets in this article.
Yeah, might be right here. Does that look right?
Yeah, that does look right. Nice.
You see
Okay.
that?
So 18th August plan mainnet merge. Bellatrix. Really very nice. Okay. So yeah, I mean it's exciting stuff. We've seen some of the biggest test networks already integrated in. It sounds like some of the smaller ones that you can work with are being added in as well. And it's pretty cool to see developers hit timelines or deadlines. I think that's something that in a lot of the NFT or other projects, DeFi projects you see, they usually don't hit deadlines. So hats off to the Ethereum devs and the Ethereum community. Very excited for this merge coming up.
Yeah, and I feel like you made a funny but good point earlier, Ev, that like it's penciled in, right? And pencils have erasers, so like it's never it's not set in stone. But I think the fact that they've actually put a date, so September 19th, like actually on the calendar, where it used to just be sometime in August or sometime in September. Like clearly they have like sprint cycles and development cycles leading up to that point where they think they could have it done by that date. I think what's interesting is that if this goes like, I don't think it's going to go without a hitch, but if it goes completely smoothly, all of a sudden it's a big question of like, why would anyone use Cardano? Why would anyone use Solana if
right.
if transaction speed is, I mean, if it's even like half of what Solana can do, right? But still has the same security that Ethereum has, still has the same scalability. It's going to be kind of interesting to see what happens and how those blockchains respond, because then kind of what's like your value add, right? Like if Ethereum can do close to the TPS that these others can do with the kind of backing that they have with the network that they already have live, like in terms of all the projects on it. It's going to be interesting to see how like Charles Hoskinson, all these other guys respond.
Yeah. And quick note on that. So I don't think this is going to dramatically increase the speed of the Ethereum network. I also don't think it's going to take away 95% of all gas fees that you're used to paying. Those are still going to be there. But the biggest thing is it's that first big step to getting to proof of stake, to being proof of stake.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, what you're going to see down the line is I believe there's proto dank sharding and dank sharding, which those names are just based off of the guys who basically created the ideas or the concepts. No puns in there.
No weed references.
Yeah, no references there. But basically, those are the concepts that are going to increase network speed. Okay. Quick little idea or a little look into that. It's with dank sharding, you're basically able to split the network up into 64 sub networks, and you're going to be able to do transactions in parallel. Proto dank sharding is basically the step to get halfway there. And then, the dank sharding is the next concept, the full concept. So, yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of stuff for them to go fully ETH 2.0 to be able to beat out every other proof of stake blockchain out there, to really solidify themselves as that proof of stake main network you should be using. But really exciting step coming up here.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? Super exciting. It's going to be interesting to see once it actually officially launches, what all those things look like, right? What do the transaction speeds look like? What does the gas fees look like? Do now ESG investors love Ethereum because that's a proof of stake platform, right? Like things like that could be really bullish for Ethereum. I think that's not to say like we aren't going to need like the level 2s, right? Like your Polygons, your Matic, things like that, right? To start to bolster that up a little bit more. But yeah, definitely an interesting point to you. If they can kind of keep on this roll and keep improving that, it should be interesting to see, how the competitors respond in the space.
Yeah. They're at that, like to piggyback off that, like they're at the point where they're processing more transactions than Visa. And so like if they were able to do that even faster than Visa does, like, I think that's what investors look at Solana and Ethereum as like the new Visa, where it's like, they're not taking 2% of it or 3% of every transaction, where it's like, okay, well now I need to factor that into my book. Now it could be like, 0.5% or less than 0.5%. But yeah, keep going with what you're on.
Oh, that's huge. Anything else on Ethereum? I think I just have 2 other pieces around kind of general market news, and then we'll hop into the other stuff here. Anything else on that?
I mean, my final thought on it is we'll just have to see how the network holds up. I know we've talked about how the Solana network goes down every once in a while. And so it's a question of, is that something that has to happen with all proof of stake blockchains? Or is Ethereum that next level of a developer community where they're able to keep the runtime up, at that AWS levels, that standard. So there's a lot of stuff to watch coming out of this. Gas, transactions per second, but also just runtime and how reliable it is. So yeah, a lot of big things that we can do or talk about in future episodes.
It's fun to get back into like the fundamentals, like we were, back when we were in a bull market, right? But one thing you can't deny is just all the macro going on, right? Like I said, you can't fight the Fed. There's a lot going on just geopolitically. One thing I wanted to share really briefly, I know last week we pulled up a big chart that was, I think, a 50-year chart of the UMISH consumer sentiment. And so we were at a low in June, about 50. What we did actually see here in July was an increase in that consumer sentiment. So another thing that could be causing some of the bullishness, right? Obviously, everything that we've talked about to this point, we're also seeing a little bit of a bump in consumer sentiment, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah. And so, Mata, when you look at the index of consumer sentiment, what are we, taking a measure of here? Is it something where it's the idea of how much people are spending on the usual consumer goods that they already look at, or I guess like when I look at this number, how should I kind of process that?
Absolutely. So great question. So consumer sentiment as a whole is really just an economic indicator that measures how optimistic consumers feel about their finances and about the state of the economy. So it's not necessarily as much hard data as it is monthly surveys done, in this case, by the University of Michigan. It's the biggest consumer sentiment index piece that teams look at. So it's normalized to have a value of 100. And so as we saw on the chart last week, you can kind of see it flow up and down. And we actually hit that low, as I mentioned, in June that we've ever seen since they started doing this polling on it. So Great question, mostly around just how optimistic consumers feel about finances and the state of the economy.
Nice.
And then the question is, are we at the bottom? Raoul Paul. Actually, really like Raoul Paul. Is super great to listen to if you're not familiar with him. He has a ton of different amazing minds on his channels, on his shows with Real Vision. But his thought is, crypto low, we might be in, right? I think we've always talked about, is there another shoe to drop? What does the macro look like? Something to keep with a grain of salt. Obviously, he's very, very intelligent, very bullish on the space. I believe he called for 20K Ethereum back when it was bowling, like, 8 or 9 months ago. So everything taken with a grain of salt.
Got to keep him honest.
Guy. Yeah, got to keep him honest, but it's nice to see kind of some of these numbers as well. Just as we start to look into this. But question is, were we at a bottom? We don't really know.
Yeah.
One last piece.
Question.
So yeah, I guess the altcoin king, what names on that list are you surprised by? What names aren't there that you think would be there?
So I'm really surprised by AVAX because of their vesting schedule and their release schedule. I'm also semi-surprised but not surprised about Uniswap, because I saw a bunch of people calling for Uniswap to make an incredible run like last month, and they said that was kind of their pick as volume picked up. And I guess part of that is because they're basically the DEX of choice on Ethereum. And so they expected, like, hey, if we do get a bottom, like in the next month, this being like a month ago, if we do get a bottom in the next month, a lot of that volume is going to come through Uniswap. So their token should get a bump too. So I saw that as well. And I know, this one's more of like a low cap altcoin, but Veracity has made crazy headway in their technology. So they've actually released it to advertisers now. And they have their own website called VeraViews. It's being tested already with advertisers. They've gotten added to like a list of like approved vendors globally. And they actually, I think they went up like 30% in a day just a couple days ago. And so they're up heavily after the 3AC liquidation. But that's another low cap to watch. But at the same time, like, I'm also surprised at XRP. I feel like there's so much noise going around that, like with the SEC and everything that's happening there. Like, that's one that a lot of people are bullish on, but I just haven't been able to touch just because I get nervous about lawsuits. Like, I want to sleep tight with my bags, but you know, I think that that's a surprise as well.
And we'll actually circle back to lawsuits and things that Sia is involved with here in a second. Before we do that, we do this every week. So wanted to make sure to pull this up. So on the left here, we have volume 88 of James Butterfield's inflows from institutions. On the right, we have the most updated that was released just about 2 days ago. So this is the one we reviewed last week on the left, and this is the updated one for this week on the right. What we'll see is, obviously, when we're looking at flows by asset specifically, we'll see that there is some outflow out of Bitcoin. Our first outflow out of Ethereum in, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. We kind of saw that, as we mentioned last week, a pretty big bump for them over the last couple of weeks, which has been nice because, as you can see, they've had pretty serious outflows from institutions over the course of the last year. The year to date. So the last 6 or so months. One thing I wanted to call our attention to, we keep asking about the bottom, everything like that. What's interesting is, as the weeks have progressed, right, we see short Bitcoin. We were surprised by the 6.3 here last week. Again, now we see even more into short Bitcoin. So institutions are seeing this happen. They're evaluating everything from a macro perspective. They're seeing everything going on with Ethereum, all the bullish news. It looks to me as if they're saying Bitcoin's gonna fall from here, right? And that's the prediction that they're making with that short. But those were the couple of pieces that I wanted to call our attention to. But anything popping out to you two here?
No, I mean, it seems like it's another somewhat tame week after we saw that huge outflow from Bitcoin a couple weeks ago. I think it was up in the 400 millions. And so that's something where it was that one big old bar right there. Yeah. And so I think it's, you know, it's still people waiting with cash on the sidelines to see where we're going to go with the Fed meeting. That is really interesting. The short Bitcoin almost doubled this week, and that's something, Mata, you've been calling out for a couple weeks now, that it's slowly increasing. So just my first thought coming out of that increase in short Bitcoin is a question of how much of the crypto market cap is Bitcoin making up. I know it's always at, or it's usually at, maybe, is it 40%? Am I too high there?
I can look up the live version.
Yeah, the live would be great, but it's usually between like 40 and 60% is somewhere, is usually somewhere where it lies. But then, like, when it falls below 40, that's like the alt season, you know, like that's like what people say is like the alt season.
Right.
So it's 42.6 right now is what I'm getting on Google.
Wow. So it sounds like maybe an alt season could be coming up, or that's what institutional is thinking. So yeah, I mean, that's a nice, like, chill week that we saw again this week. So I'd expect a little more activity out of, maybe not next week, but the week after that with the Fed meeting.
Yeah.
And then even though
one
this
way
is
or
like
another.
one way or another. And even though this is somewhat of a delayed indicator because it like tracks the week like after it's already happened, we also got to remember, like, we do talk a lot about retail, but this is the type of money, these are the type of buys that actually drive Bitcoin up. Like, it's people buying 1 million, 3 million, 4 million at a time, and not people buy, not you know, me buying 500 as my DCA or $250 as my DCA. So you know, I think if we start seeing this do more of a reversal like it did back, I'm trying to find it's a week number, but back earlier in the year, like when you just saw like 3 or 4 weeks in a row where it was positive, and then we went back negative. But, like, you know, I'm sure if we corresponded that with the chart, we're going to see some movement, positive movement on Bitcoin, because this is kind of where we're going to get that rapid upside movement, is if we start getting millions unloaded, you know, from institutions coming in.
I like that. Maybe we try to set that up next week on the Trading View. That'd be really
Yeah.
cool to
That'd be
have
really
these
cool.
back to back.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
I think last point on this, right? I think you nailed it, right? Just to piggyback on that, I think the biggest thing is, follow the money and follow the developers, right? Those are really the two rules within this space. So keep your hats on. It might be a little bump here. Have we hit a bottom again? Who knows? But macro looks pretty cloudy right now. So staying tight.
And so just looking at those numbers that you had at the bottom, Mata, we saw an outflow of like 2.5 million from Ethereum. But we've had a really great week this week, right? Like it's been quite a run. So, next week when we come back to this next chart that the man Butterfield throws together, what should we be looking at? Any ideas around maybe what a number would be? Would it be 10 million or would it be more than that? Or what are your guys' thoughts around what we might see next week in the Ethereum number?
I would think somewhere around that month to date flow of 6.6, maybe a little bit below that. Because I mean, looking at how much they've divested from it, and how much they've gone on the monthly, like I feel like from what we've seen in terms of a pump, I feel like somewhere between, and obviously it's not exact, but somewhere between like 1 million and 6 million, I would kind of expect, but not totally sure.
And if we saw a number less than that, that means probably retail's driving this bull run, right?
I would say, it's probably retail then. Yeah.
That was gonna be my point. It's a little bit tough to predict. I think Garcia makes a great point, right? You've had 446 million of year-to-date outflows, right? They've taken their profits, right? I think what they're trying to do right now is evaluate their risk to reward basis here. So how much downside does Ethereum have from here in their minds? And so if they deem, hey, the upside's way better here, I can see that inflow being much larger. But if that is fairly low, I think that's a pretty good conjecture that retail is kind of pushing Ethereum up further.
Yeah, good point.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Sia, you want to take it over?
Yeah, well, we'll finish up with some negative but also kind of interesting news, because we're getting some feedback from Web2 companies on what their thoughts are about NFTs and Web3 and all that kind of stuff. So just this morning, fresh off the press, Minecraft, their community's kind of been, as NFT Worlds has grown, as they've gotten more traction. I mean, almost 100,000 players they had, at least at their height. And as the word started to spread, more pressure came to Minecraft of saying, okay, well, what is your take on NFTs? Because there's all these projects that want to integrate, all these projects that see opportunity. Everyone in the Minecraft, NFT community kind of sees the opportunity with how popular the game is. And so they actually officially released their kind of opinion and outlook of NFTs this morning. And it basically couldn't have been more negative. So the key area here that got everyone to kind of start panicking about any NFT related to Minecraft, particularly NFT Worlds, is basically they said that blockchain technologies will not be permitted to integrate inside Minecraft client or server applications, nor may they be utilized to create NFTs associated with any in-game content, including worlds, skins, persona items, or other mods. And so a big part of the next step for NFT Worlds was to have a new tokenomics system that involved like items, soulbound skins, like all this kind of stuff, to create some sort of a flywheel. And so a lot of what their whole image was basically just focusing on integrating with Minecraft, because all those players already exist, and because they'd be able to kind of onboard a lot of people with their gasless transactions that they developed. And so basically right when this article released, we just saw a bunch of people dump their world. So it's down about 70% today, 60%, but it fell as low as like 80% in one little hour here. And so we saw it, completely sell off, and, the liquidity pool is kind of in trouble. This was hundreds of thousands of dollars, like literally yesterday. And now, they're down to 13K in liquidity in the pool. So in my opinion, we'll probably slowly see this project die off and other Minecraft projects die off. And then also, this kind of creates the question of like, does Minecraft and Microsoft, who owns Minecraft, do they say, hey, like, we want a piece of the pie. We want to own the whole pie. Like, we don't want anyone coming in here. We're working on our own thing. So, maybe positive, maybe a little bit positive, a little bit negative. But the other thing is ArcDev, who's the head developer of NFT Worlds, kind of came out and talked about how they're basically, any project that is related to Minecraft is going to have to basically pivot, because they're most likely going to, and they're confirming this, but they're most likely going to be subject to a lawsuit if they continue to integrate into Minecraft. So a lot of these projects are going to have to totally shift and maybe even create their own game. Which, if anyone's into gaming, that takes years. That's something that's not, you just pivot and just in 3 months you have a game. So that's definitely something that's of concern. But I think on the positive side of the negative news, like, at least I think that this article makes me think that Microsoft has something in the works, or they at least see opportunity where they don't want other people taking advantage of that, and they rather they be the receivers of those profits. So, definitely not the best news, but I think, looking ultra long term, how we talk a lot about in this channel, but looking ultra long term, I think it means that these Web2 companies at least acknowledge how impactful these are and acknowledge the presence of this space, and that it does have reputability. But I don't know if you guys have a take.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up pretty well. That's kind of how I took it, right? Is Microsoft's like, hey, why are we letting this NFT Worlds NFT collection take this piece of the pie when we can be doing it ourselves, as well as start to enter in what could be a pretty big future within Web3 as well. So I think you nailed it. I don't really have too much to add to that besides, hope everyone's okay out there if you were in Worlds or had the world token or anything like that. But it's just another point of things can change in a heartbeat here. So, have conviction about everything that you do, but once those fundamentals change, or once something that's super key to a project comes out, you got to have your tap dancing shoes on sometimes and make that pivot.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, like you said, I hope everybody that's, holding World or part of NFT Worlds, is doing good. It's a tough situation, and it's the reality that Web2, behemoths like Microsoft can still come into the space and have a lot of intellectual property that is used for NFT collections and other projects. So it's evidence that Microsoft sees this as a viable threat to have to put a stop to it, and warn that lawsuits could come. I think, like we talked about, there's a great team behind this, and it was something where using NFTs in the Minecraft platform, you could see where value could be taken off of like Microsoft's side to these developers' side, into the community of people that own the NFTs. And that's something that Microsoft is never going to let happen. You're never going to let that level of value leave their platform. So I think from the start, it was probably the biggest threat that NFT Worlds had to getting started. And it was just realized. So super unfortunate. It definitely gives some, validity to the space that Microsoft is willing to try and shut them down because they see them as a threat. But yeah, tough day for the NFT Worlds project. Yeah,
absolutely. Just a reminder to, be safe. Don't get too emotional about your investments, and remember that we're in, we're in a very, very risky space, even though some of it seems like really stable. So I think that does it for episode 21, guys. Great discussion. I think we covered a lot. But we'll see you all next week for the next episode, and drop a comment if you have any thoughts on NFT Worlds or anything we talked about today. But later, everybody.
Later. Have a good one, fellas.